California sun beat down a familiar warmth Ann-Margret Olsson was getting used to. It was 1963, and her star was rising faster than she could have ever dreamed. From her small Swedish-American hometown in Illinois to the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, it felt like a whirlwind. Movies like Bye Bye Birdie had introduced her vibrant energy and dazzling smile to the world. But she also felt a flicker of apprehension. He was a phenomenon almost larger than life. Would he be intimidating, aloof, or worse? Would he simply see her as another pretty face, another co-star to get through a film with? She spent hours practicing her lines, studying her character. Rusty Martin, the feisty, independent singer who captivated Lucky Jackson in Viva Las Vegas. She wanted to be prepared to show up on set and be nothing short of professional. This was her chance to work with a legend, and she was determined to make the most of it. Her parents, always supportive, but also a little overwhelmed by her sudden fame, called often to remind her to stay grounded. "Remember where you came from, Anne," her mother would say, her voice tinged with pride and a touch of worry. The day of the first cast reading arrived, a day she'd anticipated with a mix of excitement and nerves. The soundstage was bustling, crew members setting up lights, being adjusted. Ann-Margret took a deep breath, smoothing down her skirt. She spotted director George Sidney, a kind man who had given her a big break with Bye Bye Birdie. He smiled and waved her over, indicating a chair at a large table where several other actors were already seated. Her heart hammered a little faster. Then he walked in. It wasn't just a walk, it was an entrance. He moved with an easy grace, a quiet power that filled the room. He wasn't loud or flashy, not at first. He just was. He wore a simple dark suit, his famous dark hair styled perfectly, those striking blue eyes scanning the room. Ann-Margret felt a peculiar jolt, like static electricity in the air. He wasn't just a movie star, he was a presence. Their eyes met across the table. For a split second, the noise of the busy sound stage seemed to fade away. His gaze was direct, curious, and incredibly warm. Ann-Margret felt herself blush slightly, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She offered a small, polite smile. He returned it, and in that smile she saw not the king of rock and roll, but a hint of shyness, a genuine friendliness. George Sidney clapped his hands, breaking the spell. "All right, everyone settle down. Let's get started, Elvis and Margaret. Come on up. Sit next to each other." Ann-Margret's heart skipped a beat. She walked over, trying to appear calm and collected. Elvis stood up as she approached, a gesture of old-fashioned Southern charm that immediately put her at ease. He pulled out the chair next to him, waiting for her to sit down before he did. "Good to meet you, Ann-Margret," he said. It was deeper than she expected and richer. "You too, Elvis," she replied, her voice a little breathy. He chuckled softly. "Just Elvis is fine." They picked up their scripts. The first few pages were introductions, casual dialogue. But when they got to their first scene together, the magic started. They read their lines, and it was immediate. The words on the page felt alive, sparking with an undeniable energy between them. It wasn't just acting, it was a conversation, a challenge, a dance. Their characters, Rusty and Lucky, were supposed to have this fiery, competitive, yet deeply attractive dynamic, and it was there effortlessly from the very first line. Elvis leaned in slightly during one exchange, his eyes twinkling. Ann-Margret found herself matching his intensity, throwing a playful jab back. The room seemed to hold its breath. George Sidney, usually so focused on directing, leaned back in his chair, a broad smile spreading across his face. He didn't need to give notes. They were already embodying the roles perfectly, finding a rhythm that felt natural and exhilarating. By the end of the reading, Ann-Margret felt flushed, not just from the Hollywood heat, but from the sheer force of their interaction. Elvis turned to her, his smile wide. "Well, that was something," he said, his voice full of genuine pleasure. "It certainly was," she agreed, meeting his gaze. In that moment, she knew this wouldn't be just another movie. This was going to be an experience. The electric chemistry they shared was not just for the cameras. It was real, undeniable, and it had just begun. The early days of filming Viva Las Vegas were a blur of activity. But through it all, one thing became clear. The set was charged with an almost palpable energy whenever Elvis and Ann-Margret were together. They moved as if choreographed even when they weren't, their laughter echoing through the sound stages. Their first big dance numbers were a revelation. Ann-Margret, a trained dancer, was a whirlwind of precision and passion. Elvis, known for his iconic moves, was surprisingly adept at formal choreography. But he also had that raw, instinctive rhythm that made him unique. Their styles blended pace. During a rehearsal for the "Come On, Everybody" number, they were supposed to be playful, competitive. But as they danced, spinning and twirling, their hands brushing, their bodies moving in sync, it felt more like a flirtatious duel. "Watch it, King." Ann-Margret would tease, dodging his playfully outstretched arm. Elvis would grin, his eyes sparkling. "Try and keep up, Ann-Margret." Their calls of Ann-Margret and Elvis would echo, then dissolve into shared giggles. The dance instructor, a seasoned professional, would just stand back, shaking his head with a smile. "They don't need me much," he'd mutter to the crew. "They just dance." It wasn't just the dance numbers. Even during simple dialogue scenes, their eyes would lock, a silent conversation passing between them before a single line was spoken. There was a mutual respect there, an understanding of each other's craft, but also something more. It was an unspoken recognition of kindred spirits. They both loved performing, loved music, and approached their work with an intense focus and passion. One afternoon, during a break in filming, they were sitting together by the set going over lines. Ann-Margret had a complicated vocal run coming up in a song, and she was slightly nervous about it. "You've got this," Elvis said, leaning back in his chair, his voice quiet. "Your voice is incredible. I heard your album." Ann-Margret's eyes widened. "You did?" He nodded. "Yeah, loved. I just don't understand. You put a lot of feeling into it." "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you," she said, genuinely touched. Sometimes it feels like a lot of pressure." He offered a sympathetic smile. "I know that feeling every time I step on stage or in front of a camera. It never really goes away, that little buzz of nerves. But it's good, too. It means you care." They talked for a long time that day about the music business, the demands of fame, the pressure to always be on. Elvis shared stories about his early days, the chaos of his concerts, the joy of creating music. Ann-Margret told him about her singing and dancing lessons. As a child, her dreams of performing, they found common ground in their love for gospel music, both having grown up in homes where it was cherished. They even discovered a shared quirky habit, a love for practical jokes. "So, what's your best one?" Ann-Margret challenged him one day, during a lull. Elvis's eyes lit up. "Oh, you want to know? Well, one time back in Memphis, I convinced my cousin Gene that my dog had learned to talk." He recounted the story with such enthusiasm, his hands gesturing, his expressions animated, that Ann-Margret burst into laughter. "No way," she gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. "He actually believed you for a good while," Elvis chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. She told him about a prank she'd pulled on her strict ballet teacher, involving a hidden alarm clock. He listened intently, his head tilted, his gaze never leaving her face. It wasn't just that they had fun. It was the ease of it. They could be silly, serious, vulnerable, and completely themselves around each other. The crew noticed it. The photographers noticed it. The entire set hummed with the energy of their connection. Every scene they filmed together crackled with an intensity that went beyond the script. George Sidney often didn't even need to say, "Action." He just waited for their natural spark to ignite, and then the magic unfolded on its own. It's like they were born to play these parts together. one of the cameramen whispered to a grip one day, watching them film a scene where their characters were arguing but clearly captivated by each other. "More like born to be together," the grip replied, adjusting a light. "You can't fake that kind of electricity." Ann-Margret felt it too deep. In her bones, this wasn't just a job. This wasn't just professional respect. Every day on set felt like an adventure, a discovery. With Elvis, she felt seen, understood, and challenged in the best possible way. The lights, the cameras, they were all there, capturing the story of Lucky and Rusty. But they were also capturing something else, something real and powerful, blooming right before their very eyes. As the weeks turned into months, the world of Viva Las Vegas became more than just a film set. It became a bubble where Elvis and Ann-Margret's connection deepened. Their conversations stretched beyond work, delving into their personal lives, their dreams, and their fears. One afternoon, during a break from filming a complicated musical number, they found themselves sitting alone in a corner of the soundstage. Elvis had his guitar casually strumming a gospel tune. Ann-Margret, usually so full of boundless energy, was quiet, listening. "You really love that music, don't you?" she asked softly. He nodded, still playing. "More than anything, it's where I started before the rock and roll, before the movies. Just my voice and the hymns. It keeps me grounded." He looked up, his blue eyes earnest. "What about you? What keeps you grounded?" She thought for a moment. "My parents, definitely. And knowing where I came from. Small town girl, big dreams. They remind me not to get too carried away by all this." She gestured around the sprawling set. "And dancing. When I dance, I feel completely free. It's like nothing else exists." They talked about their families. Ann-Margret spoke of her Swedish immigrant parents, their sacrifices, and their unwavering belief in her. Elvis shared stories about his mother Gladys with a wistful tenderness that revealed a profound grief. He spoke of his father Vernon and his grandmother Minnie Mae, who lived with him. He was a deeply devoted family man, a side of him the public rarely saw. Ann-Margret realized that beneath the flamboyant performer was a sensitive, introspective soul. Their shared lunch breaks became longer, lingering after everyone else had left. They'd talk about movies they admired, books they'd read, places they wanted to visit. Elvis spoke passionately about the martial arts, showing her a few gentle moves, his movements surprisingly fluid and precise. Ann-Margret, in turn, shared her love for classic musicals and the precision of ballet. One sunny afternoon, a few cast members decided to go out for lunch at a casual diner nearby. Elvis and Ann-Margret ended up in the same car with a driver and another actor. The conversation was light and general at first, but soon Elvis turned to Ann-Margret. "You know, I heard you sing opera once," he said, a curious look on his face. "Is that true?" Ann-Margret laughed. "Oh goodness, that was years ago. Just a bit of fun in a talent show. I wouldn't call it singing opera, more like belting out a few high notes for a laugh." "But you could," he insisted. "You've got that range. I hear it when you hit those high notes in the songs for the movie. You can really go for it." She felt a warmth spread through her. He wasn't just complimenting her. He was listening to her, really paying attention to her capabilities. "Well, you could sing anything, Elvis. You've got that voice. You could sing the phone book and make it sound good." He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that always made her smile. "Maybe we should try that sometime. The phone book duet." The actor in the back seat coughed politely. "You two are a real team, aren't you?" They exchanged a glance, a quick, unspoken agreement. "Yeah," Elvis said, "we are." Sometimes, after a long day of filming, Elvis would invite a small group, including Ann-Margret, back to the house he rented in Bel Air. These weren't wild parties, but quiet evenings with friends, playing music, talking, and just unwinding. Ann-Margret cherished these moments. Away from the glare of the cameras and the demands of the studio, Elvis was simply... he'd sit at the piano playing old hymns, or pick up his guitar and sing for them, not for an audience of thousands, but for a handful of people he trusted. Ann-Margret would often find herself just watching him, mesmerized by his talent, but also by his genuine warmth and humility. He treated everyone with respect, from the crew members to his closest friends. He'd offer her a cold drink, ask how her day had been, share a quiet joke. In these moments, their connection felt less about dazzling chemistry for the screen and more about a deep, comfortable understanding between two people. She felt a pull towards him, a strong, undeniable current that went beyond admiration. It was a sense of belonging, a feeling that she was exactly where she was supposed to be with him, and she sensed he felt it too. Their eyes would meet across the room, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A shared secret in a world that always seemed to be watching. The script for Viva Las Vegas was just a framework. The real story, the one unfolding between them, was far more captivating. As filming progressed, the lines between their characters, Lucky and Rusty, and themselves, Ann-Margret and Elvis, blurred beautifully and dangerous. The script called for their characters to be instantly attracted, to spar and flirt, and eventually fall deeply in love, but it felt less like acting and more like living. Every touch, every glance, every argument on screen was infused with a raw, undeniable truth. There was a scene where Lucky and Rusty are supposed to be having a passionate, almost aggressive dance-off. The music was driving. The movements were sharp and sensual. As they moved closer, their bodies almost touching, Ann-Margret felt Elvis's hand on her waist, pulling her closer than the choreography strictly required. His eyes, usually so expressive, held a heat she recognized and reciprocated. She looked into them, and for a moment the world outside the dance floor faded. It was just them, two forces colliding, sparks flying. George Sidney, watching from behind the monitor, didn't call, cut. He let them go, letting the intensity build. When the music finally stopped, they were panting, slightly still, close, their gazes locked. A beat past a heavy silence before the crew erupted in applause. "That was incredible," someone shouted. Elvis slowly released her, a slight flush on his cheeks. Ann-Margret felt her own face warm. They had just channeled something profound, something deeply personal. Into their performance, their off-screen interactions mirrored this intensity. They would often be found talking in hushed tones between takes, leaning in close, their heads almost touching. They'd share inside jokes that no one else understood, their laughter bubbling up light and genuine. They'd walk around the set together, often with Elvis's arm casually around her shoulder, or his hand resting gently on her back as they navigated equipment. The crew started calling them the kids, or the sweethearts. Even George Sidney made a comment, a knowing wink in their direction. "You two better be careful," he'd say with a smile. "You're going to set the screen on fire." Ann-Margret knew he wasn't just talking about the movie. The problem, of course, was that Elvis was in a long-term relationship with Priscilla Bowley. Ann-Margret was aware of this, though Priscilla was rarely in Hollywood. Ann-Margret also had her own burgeoning career and a team of managers and agents who were meticulously planning her every move, making sure she remained America's sweet and wholesome star. Her parents, though loving, would also have been deeply concerned if they thought she was getting involved in a complicated situation. There was an unspoken tension, a fragile boundary between them. They never spoke directly about their feelings for each other, not in explicit terms. It was all communicated through lingering glances, a soft touch that held more meaning than a handshake, a silent understanding that passed between them. When they were alone, they were careful, or at least they tried to be, but the emotion was too strong to entirely hide. One evening, after filming a particularly romantic scene, Elvis walked Ann-Margret back to her dressing room. The hallways were quiet, most of the crew having already left. He stopped outside her door, his hand resting on the frame. "You were amazing today, Ann-Margret," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You too." "Elvis," she replied, her heart. He reached out his thumb, gently brushing her cheekbone, a fleeting touch that sent shivers down her spine. "Yeah, special." His gaze dropped to her lips for a second, then back to her eyes. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with raw, unacknowledged desire. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She wanted to lean in, wanted to bridge the small gap between them, but then he pulled back slowly, his hand dropping. The spell was broken. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, his voice returning to its normal tone, "I'll see you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow, Elvis." She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders disappearing around the corner. She stepped into her dressing room, closing the door behind her, leaning against it. Her heart was still racing. The unspoken connection between them was a powerful force, pulling them closer with every shared moment. But the unspoken part was also the problem. They were treading a dangerous, beautiful line, and both knew it. The world was watching, and the complexities of their lives were real. Amidst the swirling vortex of Hollywood glamour and demanding film schedules, Elvis and Ann-Margret found small, precious moments to steal away, moments where they could simply be themselves, away from the watchful eyes of the studio, the press, and even their own entourages. These glimpses of normalcy were like hidden oases, allowing their connection to deepen far beyond their professional collaboration. One weekend, after a particularly grueling week of night shoots, Elvis suggested a drive. Not a grand publicized excursion, but a quiet cruise along the winding canyon roads above Los Angeles. "Just us," he'd said, his voice low and inviting. Ann-Margret, tired but intrigued, agreed. She met him at a secluded spot, slipping into the passenger seat of his car. A sleek, dark Cadillac, one of many he owned, but this one felt like a private sanctuary. His regular driver was behind the wheel, but the back seat was empty, providing a sense of privacy. They drove for hours, the windows down, the warm California air rushing through the car. They didn't talk much at first, simply enjoying the quiet company, the shared silence that spoke volumes. The city lights began to twinkle below them as dusk settled, transforming the landscape into a sparkling tapestry. "Beautiful up here, Ann," Margaret murmured, leaning her head back against the seat. "Yeah," Elvis agreed, his eyes on the road. "Clears your head sometimes. You just got to get away from it all, the noise." She nodded. "I know it feels like I'm constantly on, like I have to be the character or the star, even when I'm not working." He glanced at her, a knowing look in his eyes. "Tell me about it. Sometimes I just want to walk into a grocery store, buy some milk, and no one notice. Just be a regular person for 5 minutes." They chuckled, a shared understanding of the bizarre reality of their lives. For a while, they talked about mundane things, their favorite foods, silly childhood memories, the simple pleasures they missed. Elvis spoke of his love for horseback riding back at Graceland, of taking his cousins out on the property. Ann-Margret recounted summers spent by a lake swimming and fishing with her father. Later, they stopped at a small, unassuming diner on the outskirts of a quiet town. It was the kind of place where locals gathered, completely oblivious to the superstar and the rising star in their midst. They slid into a booth ordering burgers and milkshakes just like any other couple. "This feels real, Ann," Margaret said, taking a sip of her milkshake, a dreamy expression on her face. Elvis smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It is real. Sometimes I forget what that feels like. Away from the cameras, the crowds." He reached across the table, his hand briefly covering hers. "Just us." That simple touch, a quiet acknowledgement in a noisy diner, felt more profound than any grand gesture. It spoke of intimacy, of a desire for connection that went beyond the superficial. Another time, after a particularly late night of filming, Elvis invited a small group back to his rented house in Bel Air. While others watched television or played pool, Ann-Margret found herself gravitating towards the living room where Elvis often sat at the piano. He began to play softly at first, then transitioning into a medley of gospel hymns and old blues tunes. He wasn't performing, he was simply playing for the sheer joy of it, lost in the music. Ann-Margret pulled up a chair nearby, just listening. She watched his strong hands move over the keys, saw the way his eyes closed. Sometimes, he looked up at one point, meeting her gaze. "You know these?" he asked, indicating the hymns. She nodded. "My parents loved them. We sang them in church." "Sing with me," he invited, his voice gentle. Hesitantly, she joined in, her clear, strong voice blending with his rich baritone. They sang together for what felt like hours, their voices intertwining, finding harmonies that resonated deep within them. It was a spiritual experience, a shared communion through music that transcended mere performance. In those moments, under the soft glow of the living room lamps, with the sounds of the night outside, they were two souls connected by rhythm and melody, utterly at peace. These stolen moments away from the glare of their celebrity were crucial. They allowed them to see beyond the Persianals, to connect as two individuals navigating an extraordinary life. They revealed the depths of their understanding, the comfort they found in each other's presence, and the unspoken language that flowed between them. It was a beautiful, fragile normalcy in a world that was anything but normal. Quiet, unspoken understanding between Elvis and Ann-Margret began to ripple outwards, unable to be contained by the walls of the soundstage or the privacy of stolen moments. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into outright gossip. The media, ever hungry for a scoop, started to notice. Photographers, already lurking around the studio gates, became more aggressive. They snapped pictures of Elvis and Ann-Margret entering or leaving the lot together, often smiling, often looking entirely too comfortable in each other's presence. Headlines in the tabloids became increasingly suggestive. "The king finds his queen." Elvis and Ann-Margret, more than co-stars. Inside the studio, the atmosphere shifted. George Sidney, while delighted by their on-screen chemistry, began to look a little worried. Studio executives, always mindful of public image and contractual obligations, started to watch them more closely. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, a man known for his iron grip on Elvis's career and personal life, was reportedly furious. Ann-Margret felt the pressure mount. Her own team, her agents and publicists began to express their concerns in no uncertain terms. "Ann-Margret, you're a rising star, America's sweetheart," her lead publicist Martha said to her one afternoon, her voice tight with thinly veiled anxiety. This association with Elvis is becoming a distraction. It's too public, it's messy." "But we're just friends," Ann-Margret protested, though even as she said it, the words felt hollow. She knew it was far more than friendship. Martha sighed, running a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. "Look, we understand the professional chemistry. It's gold for the movie, but anything beyond that jeopardizes everything you've built. Elvis has a very Conti personal life." Ann-Margret knew Martha was referring to Priscilla. It was the elephant in the room, the unspoken barrier that loomed larger with each passing day. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She cared for Elvis deeply, felt a bond with him unlike anything she had ever experienced. But she also understood the reality of the situation. Her career, her carefully constructed image, her family's hopes for her, all seemed to hang in the balance. Elvis, too, was feeling the heat. Ann-Margret noticed a change in him. He seemed more withdrawn at times, his usual playful banter. He'd often be seen in hushed conversations with his Memphis Mafia, his trusted inner circle, their faces grim. One afternoon during a lunch break, Ann-Margret found Elvis sitting alone, picking at his food. He looked tired. As she asked, sitting down beside him, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just a lot of talk, you know." She did know the Colonel. He nodded. "He's not happy. Says this is bad for business, bad for everything." He didn't elaborate, but she understood his existing relationship, his future plans. "I've been getting it too," she admitted, From my people. They're worried." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their respective worlds pressing down on them. Easy camaraderie they usually shared felt strained, overshadowed by external pressures. "It's not fair," Ann-Margret finally said, her voice quiet. "We haven't done anything wrong. We're just connecting." Elvis looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a mix of frustration and tenderness. "I know, Ann-Margret, I know. But in this life, it's not always about what's fair, is it? It's about what people think." He was right. Their lives weren't their own. They belonged in a way to the public, to the studios, to the carefully crafted narratives of their celebrity. Their undeniable connection, so beautiful and natural to them, was seen as a potential scandal, a threat to established orders. That night, alone in her apartment, Ann-Margret wrestled with her emotions. She thought about Elvis, about his warmth, his humor, his vulnerability. She thought about the way he made her feel seen, understood like no one else. And she thought about the impossible situation they were in. Could something so genuine survive in such a public, complicated world? The whispers were growing louder, forcing them to confront the very real, very difficult implications of their electrochemistry. Despite the growing pressure and the mounting whispers, the bond between Elvis and Ann-Margret continued to deepen. Elvis, perhaps emboldened by the intensity of their connection and his growing feelings, took a significant step. He invited Ann-Margret to Memphis. Graceland wasn't just a house. It was his sanctuary, his home, the heart of his world. To invite someone there, especially a woman, was an immense gesture of trust and affection. Ann-Margret knew what it meant. It wasn't just a casual visit. It was an introduction to the most intimate parts of his life. She arrived in Memphis feeling a mixture of excitement and profound nervousness. The city felt different from Hollywood, slower, more steeped in history, and a distinctive southern charm. Car met her at the airport, whisking her away through leafy suburban streets until they turned onto a familiar-looking driveway. Graceland. It was grander than she imagined, yet surprisingly warm and inviting. As she stepped out of the car, Elvis was there waiting for her on the porch, a genuine relaxed smile on his face. He wore casual clothes, looking less like a movie star and more like a man at home. "Welcome to Graceland, Ann-Margret," he said, his voice soft, taking her hand and squeezing it warmly. "Glad you made it." "It's beautiful, Elvis," she replied, genuinely awestruck. He led her inside, and the house felt instantly welcoming. It wasn't a museum. It was clearly a lived-in home, filled with laughter, music, and the constant presence of his family. She met his father, Vernon, a quiet, kind man, and his beloved grandmother, Minnie May, a feisty, affectionate woman who immediately took a liking to Ann-Margret. "So, you're the one who finally got this boy to smile again on screen," Minnie May declared, pulling Ann-Margret into a warm hug. Ann-Margret blushed, glancing at Elvis, who just grinned. Over the next few days, Ann-Margret saw a side of Elvis the world never witnessed. He was relaxed, playful, and utterly himself. He gave her a tour of Graceland, sharing anecdotes about each room from the jungle room to the pool room. He showed her his horses, clearly a great source of joy for him. And they rode together through the sprawling grounds, the Tennessee air crisp and clean. He introduced her to his close friends, the Memphis Mafia, who were protective but also clearly approved of Ann-Margret. They spent evenings in the den playing pool, listening to music and sharing stories. Elvis often sat at the piano playing hymns or jamming with his friends, his voice filling the house with a soulful melody. Ann-Margret would sit nearby, sometimes joining in, sometimes just listening, completely captivated. One afternoon, they were alone in the living room, a quiet moment settling between them. Elvis was showing her old photo albums, pictures of him as a child with his mother, with his early bandmates. He pointed to a photo of his mother, Gladys, a faraway look in his eyes. "She would have loved you, Ann-Margret," he said softly, almost to himself. "She always wanted me to find someone like you, someone strong with a good heart." Ann-Margret felt a lump in her throat. His words were a profound declaration, a glimpse into his deepest desires. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was a soul-level recognition. He talked about his childhood in Tupelo, the struggles, the deep connection to his faith. Ann-Margret shared more about her own upbringing, her immigrant parents' struggles and their unwavering determination. They found a deep resonance in their similar humble beginnings, despite their wildly different paths to stardom. Their time in Memphis was a period of intense bonding, a confirmation of the profound connection they shared. It was a love story unfolding in a private, sacred space, away from the Hollywood machine. Ann-Margret saw Elvis not just as the king, but as a kind, complex man who longed for normalcy and genuine connection. She felt loved, understood, and cherished. But as her visit drew to a close, the bittersweet reality began to creep back. In this bubble of normalcy was temporary. Soon she would return to Los Angeles and he would return to his life with its undeniable complexities. The Memphis connection had solidified their feelings, made them undeniable, but it had also made the impending reality of their separate lives even harder to face. Their return to Hollywood after the Memphis interlude was like stepping back into a different reality. The warmth and intimacy of Graceland were replaced by the cold glare of studio lights and the constant hum of industry. Demands, the whispers had intensified, the tabloid headlines screamed bolder accusations. The bubble had burst. Ann-Margret and Elvis found themselves under even greater scrutiny. Every interaction on set was watched, every smile interpreted. Their respective teams had doubled down on their warnings. Colonel Parker was reportedly furious about the Memphis visit, viewing it as a direct threat to Elvis's carefully managed image, and more importantly to his existing engagement. Ann-Margret's publicists stressed the importance of her wholesome image, and the potential career damage of being seen as a homewrecker or involved in a scandal. "You have to be careful, Ann-Margret," Martha urged, her voice grim. "This is not just about you. It's about your reputation, your future." The weight of the world pressed down on them. They were two people, deeply, irrevocably drawn to each other, caught in the intricate, unforgiving machinery of superstardom. Their conversations, once easy and joyful, became laced with a quiet tension, a bittersweet understanding of their predicament. One evening, after a particularly draining day of filming, they found themselves alone in Elvis's dressing room. The air was heavy. Elvis sat on the couch, running a hand through his hair, his usual vibrant energy muted. Ann-Margret sat opposite him, her heart aching. "This is getting out of hand," Elvis said, his voice low and weary. "The Colonel is... he's putting his foot down, and your people too, right?" Ann-Margret nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. "Yes, they say it's too much, that we have to cool it." He looked up. "How do you cool? Something like this?" He gestured vaguely between them, indicating the powerful, undeniable connection they shared. "It's not a switch you can just turn off." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I feel it too, Elvis, but what can we do? We both have so much, so many people depending on us, so many expectations." He got up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city light. "I love being with you, Ann-Margret. More than I've loved being with anyone in a long, long time. You make me feel myself. You understand me." Her own heart swelled with emotion. "You do the same for me, Elvis. You make me feel alive, free, like I can be completely Ann-Margret, not just a movie star." He turned, facing her. "And that's why this is so hard." His voice was heavy with resignation. "They won't let us. They won't let us." The emphasis was on us, as if they were a separate entity, a unit that the world was determined to dismantle. Ann-Margret stood and walked towards him. She reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. "We can't ignore the truth of it, can we? Your life, my life, they're so public, and there are obligations." She didn't need to name Priscilla. He knew. They both knew. He looked down at her, his eyes searching, her face filled with a mixture of love, regret, and a profound sense of helplessness. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. It was a hug of comfort, of goodbye to a possibility that was never truly theirs. "It breaks my heart, Ann-Margret," he murmured into her hair. It truly does. She clung to him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Mine too, Elvis, mine too. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, acknowledging the impossible truth. Their chemistry, their love was real, powerful, and undeniable. The world they lived in, the expectations placed upon them, and the existing commitments formed an insurmountable wall. They were two stars pulled together by an irresistible force, but destined to orbit in separate galaxies. It was a heartbreaking realization, a moment of mature, painful acceptance that their romance, as much as they longed for it, could not be. The final weeks of filming Viva Las Vegas were steeped in a bittersweet melancholy. The electric energy between Elvis and Ann-Margret remained, but it was now laced with an unspoken sadness, a recognition of an ending before it had truly begun. They continued to deliver breathtaking performances, their on-screen chemistry as undeniable as ever, but off-screen a new, quieter understanding settled between them. They still sought out each other's company, but their interactions were tinged with a careful respect for the boundaries they knew they had to maintain. The playful banter still occurred, but the lingering touches were fewer, the private conversations more guarded. It was as if they were learning to breathe through the pain of a beautiful dream fading. On the last day of filming, the atmosphere on set was thick with farewells and congratulations. Crew was celebrating, relieved to have completed a demanding production. Ann-Margret and Elvis, however, felt a profound weight in their hearts. This wasn't just the end of a movie. It was the end of a chapter, a forced separation from a bond that had profoundly changed them both. After their final scene together was shot, George Sidney called "Wrap." The applause was thunderous. Elvis walked over to Ann-Margret, a faint smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice a little husky, "that's a wrap on Lucky and Rusty." "And on us too, I suppose," Ann-Margret replied, her voice soft, trying to keep it steady. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Not entirely. Not on us." He reached out, taking both of her hands in his. "What we had here, Ann-Margret, it's real. It was real from the first day, and it's not something that just vanishes when the cameras stop rolling. I know," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "I'll never forget it, Elvis. Never forget you." "Me neither, darlings," he said, squeezing her hands gently. They stood there for a moment, saying goodbye without words, pouring all their unfulfilled longing and enduring affection into that silent exchange. There was no dramatic kiss, no passionate declaration, only a deep, shared understanding and a profound sense of loss. "We'll always be friends, won't we?" she asked, needing the reassurance. "Always," he confirmed, his voice firm. "You're special, Ann-Margret. Always will be." It was a hug of deep affection, of acknowledgement, and of a promise. Promise that even if their paths diverged romantically, their connection would remain. In the weeks and months that followed, true to their word, their bond persisted. They couldn't be together publicly in the way their hearts might have desired, but they found ways to stay in touch. Phone calls, often late at night, sometimes stretching for hours. Letters written on personal stationery, filled with observations about their lives, shared memories, and words of encouragement. Elvis would send her flowers, always pink, her favorite color. A small, recurring gesture that spoke volumes. He would call her sometimes just to hear her voice or to share a new song he was working on, humming it over the phone. She would tell him about her latest film project, her concert tours. They became confidants, sharing the burdens and joys of their extraordinary lives. They were two people who understood the unique pressures of fame, like no one else could, and in each other they found a safe harbor. Their relationship evolved from a fiery on-set romance to a profound, enduring friendship, forged in the fires of mutual admiration and undeniable connection. It was a love that defied the conventional definitions, a bond that transcended the physical. It was a love that learned to exist in the quiet spaces, in the shared memories, in the unwavering support they offered each other across the miles. The ending of their film might have marked the end of their public romance, But it was just the beginning of a truly unique and lasting love. Years passed, and the world moved on. Viva Las Vegas became a classic, a testament to the undeniable spark between its two stars. Elvis married Priscilla, and Ann-Margret found love and married Roger Smith, a man she would spend the rest of her life with. Their lives took different, parallel paths, each navigating the tumultuous waters of fame, family, and personal growth. Yet, through it all, the unique and profound connection between Ann-Margret and Elvis endured. It wasn't a romantic love in the traditional sense anymore, but something deeper, something unbreakable. It was a love born of mutual respect, shared experience, and that initial electrifying chemistry that had never truly faded. Ann-Margret would often receive a bouquet of pink flowers, always on special occasions, sometimes just because she knew they were from Elvis. No card was needed. It was his silent message, a reminder of their shared history, a reaffirmation of his enduring affection. And she would always send him a gift, a thoughtful note, or simply make a phone call to check in. They supported each other from afar. When Elvis went through difficult times, Ann-Margret felt it keenly, offering quiet words of encouragement and concern to their occasional phone calls. When Ann-Margret faced professional challenges, Elvis would be one of the first to reach out, offering his unwavering belief in her talent and strength. Even after Elvis's divorce from Priscilla, and despite the many people who entered and exited his life, Ann-Margret remained a constant. She was the one who truly got him, the one who saw beyond the king to the kind, complex man beneath. And he in turn recognized her strength, her talent, and her genuine heart. When the news of Elvis Presley's passing broke in August 1977, the world reeled. For Ann-Margret, it was a profound personal blow. It felt like a piece of her own history. A significant part of her heart had been torn away. She mourned him deeply, not just as a legendary performer, but as a beloved friend, a soulmate, in a way only they truly understood. She attended his funeral, her presence a silent testament to the depth of their bond. She walked past his casket, laying a single pink rose on it, a final, poignant gesture of love and remembrance. It was her way of saying goodbye to the man who had touched her life in such an extraordinary way, the man with whom she had shared an electric, undeniable connection. In the years that followed, Ann-Margret rarely spoke publicly about the intimate details of their relationship, always maintaining a respectful discretion. But when she did, it was always with profound affection and respect. She acknowledged the unique bond, the spark that had been real and had continued to resonate throughout their lives. She never denied the deep love they shared, but always emphasized its unique, complex nature. Their story, the one that unfolded behind the scenes of Viva Las Vegas, was a testament to a different kind of love, not a storybook romance that ended in a conventional happily ever after, but a bond of souls that transcended fame, expectations, and even the passage of time. It was a love that shaped them, enriched them, and left an indelible mark on their hearts. Ann-Margret and Elvis Presley's electric chemistry wasn't just for the cameras. It was real, a beautiful and powerful force that connected two extraordinary people in a way that truly lasted a lifetime. It was a heartwarming reminder that love in all its forms can be found in the most unexpected places, leaving behind a legacy of enduring affection and a connection that time could never diminish.